I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. This is part 4 of my project of reading one book from each year from 1984 until 2024. And we have reached 2010. And for 2010, I read Karnali Blues by Buddhishvaga. And I have a full review of this book on my channel. I read it for Nepal for my Reading Around the World challenge. And this book is about the relationship between a son and his father. His father is very ill, he's very old, and the son reflecting back on their life together. And it's a very typical book about this kind of relationship, about a man who is seeing his father almost dying and then having to think back about what has made him the man he is today, and if that is positive or negative. I really liked the book because it was such a wonderful view into Nepalese culture and Nepalese society, the family relationship. I didn't necessarily have an idea about when this was because this was a very rural place in Nepal, so it could sort of fit in a lot of different time spans. But I do enjoy, but it was a very interesting warmth in the relationship, even when it came to the more harsher, critical view of how his father had chosen to live his life. It was still a lot of love and respect on the page, which is always very fun to read. But what it made me think about was how few books I know is about a mother's relationship to her children. We have a lot about a father-son. This could also be in part about how many men are allowed to create films and write books. Historically, patriarchy, that stuff just happens. But this is sort of very dominant between father and son. So we don't really necessarily have that many stories of a son and his mother, or a daughter and her parents. If you have any good stories about any of the other familiar relationships like that you will recommend, please let me know down below, because I enjoy these types of books. For 2011, I read Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a book about a couple who tries to figure out who is going to inherit this night circus. I wanted to enjoy this book much more than I actually did. I found that the writing was interesting. The characters were okay in a sense. I think what I found most disappointing is that I almost wanted it to be even more fantastical. I wanted it to be, if you're choosing sort of this magical place and this magical setting, shouldn't the story that you also tell be more fantastical and be less humdrum? The story became almost very humdrum. But I know it's a very popular book, so what do I know? For 2012, I read The Mirrored World by Deborah Dean, and I don't actually remember much about this book, I have to be honest, which kind of says a lot about this book. It's about Russia during Catherine the Great. The reimagination of the life of Saint Xenia, one of Russia's most revered and mysterious holy figures. I have just the fact that I can't even remember reading this. I know I did, and I read it actually back all the way back in March. We're now in December, but that maybe says the most I can say about this book. For 2013, I read The Little Parish Bookshop by Nina George. And this is about a man who is running a bookshop, and he has been hurt and hardened by life and love until a woman comes in and turns it all back around. And it's fine for what it is. It's a quaint little romance book, and it will scratch that itch perfectly fine. For 2014, I read Elizabeth is Missing by Emma Healy, and this is about a woman who has dementia, who is convinced that someone named Elizabeth is missing, and is convinced that there has been a crime, but no one believes her because she has dementia. So she, as someone with dementia, then has to figure out and solve this crime. The concept itself is absolutely brilliant. I was a bit disappointed by the ending, but it's such a wonderful story. And I love the fact that because it's written mostly from the perspective of this woman who has dementia, and it would be so easy for that to be repetitive and annoying because of the repetitiveness. But Emma Healy creates such realistic characters that even if you don't love them, you still have empathy for them and understanding for them. You understand why nobody believes that Elizabeth is missing, because Elizabeth isn't missing. What is this demented woman talking about? And yet when you are in the main character, and the main character, Maud. The main character's name is Maud. And when you're in the voice of Maud, you can feel that something is wrong, even if you don't understand what it is, which is a very believable way of having a voice of someone with the dementia, where you understand something because your body remembers it, or your emotions remembers it, but your language of it is lacking and completely disappeared, and the frustration it is. I have to admit that I think the ending was a bit disappointing when we sort of figure out what all of this is about. But the journey there was such a wonderful story, especially if you do have had members who have dementia, as I have. I've had two grandparents who I've lost to dementia. And having Maud being so lovely created and so much respected made me nostalgic, bittersweet. It's a sad, because it's absolutely horrible disease, but it's still so wonderful to see that someone, just because they don't have their language anymore and they're very sick, can still keep their humanity in a way. For 2015, I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and I am so sorry that I'm now butchering this name, Toshikazu Tawagachuchi. Or, yeah, I'm sorry, very sorry about that. Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a form of either science fiction or fantasy. I would actually say it's more a fantasy book than a science fiction book. So it's a fantasy book where you have this cafe where you can drink a coffee and through that go back in time. But you can only stay at that cafe. So you can't really move anywhere. You can't, so it's going back in time, presumably because you want to talk to someone who was at that cafe at an earlier date. And this, I know, has been a sensation. It's a reason why it's a sensation. It's such a wonderfully written book. So the characters are sort of, they're three-dimensional, they're absolutely complex, but it's not a character study, so it's not sort of very much about what's happening to them that is in the cafe, that is running the cafe. What it's about is, of course, the people who choose to go back in time. Why are they going back in time? What's the consequences of them going back in time? Can you change something if you go back in time? Will that matter? Is that important? And what I also enjoyed so much about this book is that because everything happens in this cafe, it became very an intimate book. Even if these are, that some of the characters going back in time are characters that we only know for a short time of the book. And we don't necessarily know so much about the details. Very much is sort of implied, but it's so intimate, it's so direct. It's a very, in a weird sense, a very ethical book, because it's about what do you do when you have someone in front of you. What kind of ethical responsibilities do you have to the people that you have right there in front of you? And there's actually an ethical theory about this. If you're interested, you can search up Levinas, who works a lot with this theory about, and I love the book so much I can't really say how much I love the book. But it is, especially because of the ethical aspect of it, of why do you choose to go back in time, and what will happen going back in time, what's the point of going back in time? You can't change anything, but you might get more knowledge. For 2016, we have the book Don DeLillo, Sarah Kay. Sarah Kay is about someone who is about to die in a secret lab where the body's been preserved. And what the book is dealing with, from my reading, is of course our relationship with the fact that we are mortal beings, and how do we deal with the fact that we are mortal beings? Money can't buy you time necessarily when your time is up. No span of knowledge is going to stop you from dying at some point. And that is interesting in when we are living in a society that is becoming more and more capitalistic, more and more individualistic, and more based on this whole American dream of pulling yourself up by bootstraps. So we are living in a society that is telling us more and more about you have control over your own life, that you are the one who decides your fate. You are the one who, with hard work, get to decide what to do, where you end up. It's your hard work that is going to decide anything for you. But it's not. Or it's true, but with some limitations. Because no matter how much you work, no matter how much you earn, no matter how much you owe, you're still going to die. So death in and of itself is a way of contradicting the sort of the ideal and the discourses that we have in our society, because you cannot control anything in this world. You can control something, but there's a lot of things you do not have control over. And how do we deal with that when the world says that we should have control over everything and can have control over anything? It's an interesting book. For 2017, I read Second Chance at Channelview Farm by Joe Bartlett. This is a quaint little romance book about Olivia, who goes back to a city, a small town where she visited a lot as a child, and falls in love. And as a romance book, it was fine. It's again, it's very much what's on the tin. For 2018, I read Which Way to Spellbinder Bay by Sam Short. This is a fantasy mystery with a bit of a romance thrown in for flavor, which is about a witch called Millie Thorne, who is given a house in which it turns out that she is a witch. And she gets to learn a lot about magical places. So this is a fairly straightforward get to know the world, get to know the characters, and this very simple murder mystery where you are supposed to, again, it is what it says on the tin. And I think maybe that this book falls a bit short because, it's Sam Short. It probably feels a little short because you feel that this is a part of a larger series of books, that this is sort of the introduction to a series more than just an individual standing alone book, which means that there is a lot of sort of setting up of things that doesn't really matter in this book alone. Which sort of brings the enjoyment down if you're just going to read this one book. But if you enjoy fantasy mystery, I think you might enjoy reading the entire series. It's fairly short and fairly simple to get through. For 2019, I read The Confession of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins. I read this for my Cayman Islands for Reading Around the World project. And this is about a woman of color who moves from, I don't think it's Cayman Island. I wonder what country did she move from? Okay, I can't really find the details about that right now, but she moves from a colony to London in the 1800s, and she sort of moves from place to place as a servant until she is put on trial for something. And that's where sort of the confession of Franny Langton. So the confession is the confession that she gives on the because she is put on trial. Wonderfully written, beautiful main character. The main character, of course, is a slave, is in servitude, and talks a lot about the complexity of being in that situation, where you sort of are completely dependent on someone, simply because society is organized that way, but at the same time not liking them, but even more complexly when you do like them, that sometimes you sort of the book is so good, and I don't want to spoil anything. It's difficult to say something when it's spoiled, but it is sort of about that not all of the people that she serves are people that she dislikes, and that is a part of the complexity of her journey. For 2020, I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, the famous programmer who became an author like everyone did in 2020. This is an introduction of 4 friends who become the murder club. And I know that the gimmick is the fact that these are people in their 80s who are there, so you're sort of trying to turn on their head that, oh, old people can also be interesting and be main characters of stories. Which isn't wrong. I mean, I enjoy reading characters who are elderly in stories. I just wish that it wasn't so much of a gimmick, that they just happened to be in their 80s instead of characters in their 80s who happen to be da-da-da. So that, but I think also that sort of teething problems in the first book, of course, because I've heard a lot of positive things of the other books that he published in this Murder Club mystery book series. One of the things I also, and again, I don't know if it's just teething problems, but these 4 characters, the problem I had with Sex and the City and a lot of other books about them, and that is, why are these 4 people friends? What do these 4 people really have in common? because there is something that you want to create a dynamic that is interesting, that is sort of for dramatic effect. So you need people who are different, who can then sort of push against one another. You need characters who don't agree, because where else would the conflict be? But the problem is it's not really believable. You're not friends with people that you fight with all the time. So if you have any good stories where sort of four very different characters are friends and it is in a believable way, or if you like that kind of dynamic, I'm interested to know if I'm the only one who is annoyed by that way of writing character dynamics, or if if people agree with me, and if you don't, why do you think that this doesn't really bother you? For 2021, we have Assembly by Natasha Brown. And Natasha Brown is a woman of color in Britain, and Assembly is very much a text about how she is sick of racism. And there is a lot of anger in the text. It's a lot of frustration in the text. It's a text where she sort of is going to visit her boyfriend's family and talking sort of in a meta way about how she ended up in that situation, and talking about racism, talking about classism. And she has a lot of interesting points, and I did enjoy reading about this from a non-American point of view, because so many of the books that talk about this is from an American point of view. So it's very interesting to read it from a British point of view, because of course the view of class is very different in Britain than it is in the US. And the way that she also includes, for example, class as such an obvious thing that influences how you are met as a person of color. For 2022, I read the poetry book Bamboo Phobia by Coco Thet. I read this for my project of reading around the world for Myanmar. This is a book of poetry that very much comments on Myanmar's very bloody history. And the illustration of, at least the edition that I have, is very much of a red bamboo, which points to how the bamboo was used as a torture device. And there is so much raw emotions in the poetries about the pain that Coco Thet and a lot of his contemporaries went through, because that was such a bloody part of Myanmar history. For 2023, I read Atlas, The Story of Poor Salt by Lucinda Riley and Harriet Whitaker, which is the 8th book of the Seven Sisters series. And I have to admit, I haven't read any of the other books. Because and that was simply because I just wanted a book that was published in 2023, and this was easily accessible, but also because the way this book was promoted was that this book, The Seven Sisters, is a series of 7 books that Lucinda Riley wrote before she died, talking about the sisters from one family where all of them were adopted. And apparently there is a lot of mystery that is happening towards the end about who their father is, why is he adopting all of them, what is going on. So the books are historical romance books, but there is sort of an underline of mystery in all of them. And then this book was supposed to be the one that sort of where all of the mystery aspects of it is fulfilled. Lucinda Riley was died before this book could be published, so it was finished by her son, and it was both interesting in the sense that, of course, I wanted to know more about this. I enjoyed the mystery that they were presenting. But, of course, the book assumed that you had this 7 other books of history with these characters beforehand. So that part was lacking. The aspect of who these characters were and how they were connected with one another. But I enjoyed the mystery. I enjoyed the relationships that they had. There were a lot of characters, so I got a bit lost with who were known with who at some points. But that's my problem when I read a book that's number 8 in a series. And for 2024, I read Just for the Summer by Melody Carlson, which is about 2 hotel managers who chooses to switch places over the summer, you know, the most popular time for a hotel manager, to just experience what it is to be a hotel manager in a different hotel. The main character that we follow is Ginny Masters, who moves from her upper class hotel and in an old fishing lodge that is managed by Jacqueline Potter, who then goes the other way around. Ginny Masters is the main character, and I think that is what's and the problem with that is that Ginny Masters is also the more boring person of the pair. And for one reason, I do understand that, because Ginny Masters is the character that most fit into the romance trope. She is much more bland. She's therefore much easier blank slate. She wants to try a new place because her heart was broken and she isn't respected at her job in the way that she wants to be respected. And she moves to this fishing lodge and does everything well. She managed to pull everyone up and is just a joy to be around and gets her guy. Spoilers. So she is much more the traditional romance trope, which is probably why I thought that she was the more boring one, because she doesn't really have an arc. She doesn't really develop. Jacqueline Porter is a girl who was raised by her grandfather, spoiled very much by her grandfather, because her grandfather was the one who had to raise her, and then as an adult has her sort of grandfather turn her back on her because she is spoiled, which is very much an a more complex character and a much more interesting dynamic, because in what right, on one hand, she needs to be alone. She needs to sort of have everyone turn their back on her, because otherwise she will just continue to be a spoiled brat. And that's not good character development. But at the same time, she didn't become a spoiled brat because of bad genes. She became the spoiled brat because other people spoiled her. And I'm sort of, and that would have been very much interesting character dynamic, which we don't really get because she's just there. So I enjoyed the parts with Jacqueline Potter, even if Jacqueline Potter as a character annoyed me because she was a spoiled brat. But I enjoyed her story because it's an arc, it's development. She has to change if she wants anything. And that's all the books I've read, published from 1984 to 2024. And I started, of course, this project because I wanted to read more modern books. My background when I started was classics. I still read mostly classics, even though I'm now reading more modern, because I'm also reading more world literature. And on one hand, I do enjoy the fact that this project made me have to read more diversely and had to go out of my comfort zone much more. And I read books that I would probably not have read otherwise, and I really much enjoyed. And I don't mind really having sort of tried books that I didn't enjoy, because at least I tried something new. What I struggled mostly with this project is actually creating these videos. How it's easy to talk about books you loved. It's easy, in a sense, even if I just went bleh, it's wonderful when it comes to Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And it's easy to talk about the books that you hate if you are able to articulate why you dislike it. How do you talk about books that are just meh? How do you talk about books that are just fine? It was okay. I enjoyed reading it while I read it, but it's not that memorable. I don't know. How do you do that? Do you talk about books with other people? How do you deal with people talking about books that were just okay? I really need tips regarding this for my channel. And please let me know if you read any of the books I have read, and what books you enjoyed most, and if I should do this next year as well. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.